ISIS is essentially the continuation of the Anbar awakening, or the Sunni awakening, in 2006, 2007, 2008. Remember, Petraeus saw the entirety of Iraqi society arrayed against the invasion forces, and he said, well, what I have to do here is to break that unity. I will create a counter-gang. I will create, in the method of Brigadier General Frank Kitson of the British Army, I'll create a pseudo-organization here, right? A pseudo-tentacle, or counter-gang, indeed, and I'll have them attack some other part of Iraqi society. We'll get a civil war going, and that's what he did. Mm-hmm. So the Sunni awakening, or the Anbar awakening, let's say of the mid-aughties, the previous decade, is exactly what we get with ISIS. ISIS is a continuation of that. And the idea was, it's a CIA secret army. It's just like the Contras in Nicaragua, or so many other examples that we've had over the years. And the reason they want to keep it, of course, is they want to use it. ISIS has to be used one day to overthrow Assad, if they can. That was the original idea. Perhaps go in and wreck Lebanon, another possibility. Maybe wreck Jordan, who knows. But principally, the idea with ISIS was to send it east, to send it against Iran, to send it into Central Asia, targeting big, important countries like Kazakhstan and the other so-called stands, right, the five in Central Asia. But then think about Dagestan, think about Chechnya, think about the southern part of Russia in general, but especially the Caucasus, Transcaucasus. The idea of this Petraeus clique is that ISIS has to be tenderly preserved so that these lunatics can be redeployed. So that's why the failure. In other words, you can't blame this on Obama. You can blame it on Obama in the sense that he should have fired all these people, but they've always got blackmail files on him. He has always been very fearful, very timid, very cautious, and so forth. But you still got to understand, he's not the biggest fascist on the block. They are. Petraeus, Allen, Breedlove. Those are the enemy. At this point, Obama is actually an influence tending to put the brakes on these things. And I think that's absolutely fundamental for people to understand. So what are we left with now? The 100-kilometer doorway, the portal, maybe. You can call it all sorts of things. The royal road of supply. Now, here's what the supply looks like. Erdogan of Turkey, who has now just gotten a kind of a partial victory, not really a complete victory, in the Turkish election held this past Sunday. The idea there being he wanted to get a 60% supermajority of the votes so that he could dictate, as in the style of Hitler, he could dictate the creation of a dictatorship under legal color. In other words, with a pseudo-legal basis. Right? So that would have been 60%. Now, he fell far short of it. He got up to just about 50%. So he's got a majority in the parliament in Turkey, which is enough to create a government, but not enough to do the unilateral alteration of the Constitution. And I hope he doesn't succeed, because in simplest terms, Erdogan is the caliph of the ISIS. He's the caliph of the Islamic State. He's the boss of this entire thing. This person that we're shown on television from time to time, right? Baghdadi, the guy with the Rolex, right? He's preaching his speech in the mosque, his sermon. Yep. And he's got the Rolex watch. That guy is a faker. That guy is simply one of many double agents working for the CIA. The real boss, and you can see why, is Erdogan. Now, it's not just Erdogan. It's the entire Erdogan clan, dynasty, family, what do you want to call it. His son, Erdogan's son, one of them at least, is an oil smuggler. And his specialty is to take the oil, which has been stolen by ISIS in northern Iraq, and put that into trucks, ship it across the Turkish border, primarily through this 100-kilometer doorway, portal, and then get that to the coast, or sell it inside Turkey, or get it going to other places. So that's the son. Erdogan's daughter is essentially a nurse. She organizes a hospital for wounded terrorists that's just north of the Syrian border inside Turkey. So we can say that not just Erdogan as a person, as a politician, but his entire family, his entire clan is totally wrapped up, right, interpenetrating with the ISIS bureaucracy. So look at this wonderful situation. We've got a NATO government, right, a government of a so-called NATO member state who is trying to successfully essentially, use his country as a base for the ISIS terror organization. Now, he has tried to camouflage this at certain points. You remember at the end of July, we got this moment when Obama left town, right? Obama was out of Washington, and then as soon as he was on the plane, this was, again, end of July, Allen got on the phone with Erdogan, and they said, guess what? We're going to declare a safe zone, a safe haven for terrorists. You look, by some strange coincidence, the safe haven exactly overlaps with this 100-kilometer Jarablus corridor, which is exactly the same thing. And they wanted to put NATO air cover over that. Now, that would have been a very blatant and impudent way to essentially try to institutionalize this terrorist corridor, and it would mean that NATO would protect the terrorist logistical deliveries and make sure that nobody tried to interfere. Right? The Syrian Air Force from time to time does interfere, but certainly not the U.S. forces. So the White House that same day said, no, this is not our policy. This is not us. Right? He's off the reservation. That was when he should have been fired. He should never have been appointed. But that should have been the firing of General John Allen right there. Unfortunately, Allen was blackmailing Obama during the entire time, saying, if you fire me, I'm going to come out and say that your Iran nuclear accord is junk and that you're selling out the U.S. and you're a traitor and I don't know what else. So essentially, Allen interprets the demands of the Saudis, of Erdogan, of Qatar, and all of these other reactionary Arab forces, right? These sort of Dark Ages types. But now he's on his way out. ISIS is a paper tiger. ISIS is a fraud. ISIS is a Madison Avenue publicity bubble. Right when this started, we had all these idiot commentators on cable TV essentially saying, ISIS, why, those guys are 20 feet tall. They have magical powers. Nothing can stand against them. And they're so clever. They're all over the social media, and on and on and on. This is all baloney. And the point was, this was the Kurds did an exemplary service for the world when they deflated that myth by capturing Kobane and then holding it, and they've held it ever since. So if you just unleash the Kurds with some appropriate weaponry and the obvious air support, the Kurds could do this. They could close that gap. Now, suppose the U.S. says no. Obama says, no, I'm feeling especially weak today. I don't want to do it. Well, then you go to the Russians, of course, and you say to Putin, change what you're doing. Because if you notice, there is, as far as we can tell, the Russian airstrikes not so much targeting this ISIS area, but attacking the area of Nusra, that is to say, Al Qaeda. The
Nusra front, they're pounding the hell out of them. You're right. Yeah.
But that is obvious, and I think you can see why. You can see it's actually the correct thing to do. The Russians had to put their air base in the middle of the Alawite area. In other words, they had to have a very friendly population all around them, and they did that. And therefore, they've got to clobber the Syrian rebel forces that are closest to that area. In particular, say between Aleppo and Latakia, they've got to pound those out of existence because they can't have the danger of a raid by terrorist rebels coming in from nearby. They've got to drive them back and secure the area of their airbase. But now,
which they are, they're doing a good job at that.
They're doing fine, but that's not enough. And in other words, let's not be groupies for anybody in this situation. Okay, so the idea being, the Russians should now change what they're doing. The Russians should now begin interdicting that area of transport. In other words, the 100-kilometer gap should now become a prime target. If you're in the United States, you should get on social media and say, Obama, interdict the Jarablus corridor, right? Close it. Stop ISIS from getting their supplies. Dump Erdogan. Erdogan is in many ways your biggest enemy. And, of course, the resistance against...
How do we affect regime change in Turkey? How do we dump Erdogan?
You can do it anywhere else. You can do it in Turkey. And they should have done it. In other words, somebody intelligent, I think this last election was obviously an occasion where if he had gotten a few percentage points fewer, even a few, right? Vote fraud can't do everything, but it can do a lot, as we know in this country. So a little bit of shaving off Erdogan's total would have been perfectly in order. And at that point, he would have needed a coalition, and that would have hamstrung him, and all kinds of other problems. But God, if these characters in NATO know anything, they know how to get rid of governments. They've done it all over the place. So Erdogan right now is a great threat to the future of humanity, because you can see Erdogan and Davutoglu are absolutely committed to supporting ISIS at all costs, and the U.S. media bear a special responsibility for lying about this and covering it up. The simple fact that he's the caliph of ISIS, that's him. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, president of Turkey, is the boss of ISIS. In the course of this, one of the slides I had in my slideshow for this trip is a picture of Erdogan, and he's pulling off this mask that he's got. And the mask is the mask of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the official caliph, the stand-in, the show caliph, right? The one who's there for publicity purposes. But in reality, as I said before, it's Erdogan. So in this country, in the United States, Obama closed this 100-kilometer corridor, the Jarablus corridor, call it what you want, close the border between Turkey and Syria, and therefore ISIS will wither on the vine. It will die. The demand here is to end NATO, to essentially take down the NATO apparatus. And I think this is necessary. That's the reason I was there, is that I came to that conclusion quite a few years ago, but other experiences over the years have essentially reconfirmed me in this belief. You have to realize that all of this horrible, bloody theater that we've seen, the neocons, 9/11, the attack on Iraq, and then all the terrorism, which people by now are getting to know, that the Enrico Mattei was killed by the CIA, Moro was killed, in effect, by the CIA, Breivik in Norway some years ago was a CIA deployment, that the Charlie Hebdo came in response to President Hollande saying a couple of days earlier, the sanctions against Russia have to end. In other words, it's this endless catalog of terrorism, false flags, excess, and so forth. And these are concentrated in two places. One is in the CIA, but also in the permanent NATO bureaucracy. These people in Brussels and in Mons. This entire thing needs to be taken down. People are absolutely out of patience with neocons. And I say this to people, if it ever occurs to you to vote for a Republican, stop thinking that way. There's something wrong with your thinking. Because if you look at the staffs, the people that have now been brought on board, not just by Jeb Bush, but by all of them, you vote for a Republican, you will get a neocon warmonger. Now, this is also true of Madame Clinton, right? She's practically a neocon in her own right.
You got it.
But the idea is that people are fed up with this, and they want this NATO alliance to be essentially broken up. And I think I have to appeal to Americans. The reason why is what we have allowed to go on here. How did George Bush ever get to be president and stay president? How do we ever have people in the government like Wolfowitz or Newland or these people, right? This is simply unacceptable to the world. And if you insist on having these people, then the resentment and anger against the United States will grow and grow and grow. It's a CIA secret army. It's just like the Contras in Nicaragua or so many other examples that we've had over the years. And the reason they want to keep it, of course, is they want to use it. ISIS has to be used one day to overthrow Assad, if they can. That was the original idea. Perhaps go in and wreck Lebanon, another possibility. Maybe wreck Jordan, who knows. But principally, the idea with ISIS was to send it east, to send it against Iran, that these lunatics can be redeployed. So that's why the failure. In other words, you can't blame this on Obama. You can blame it on Obama in the sense that he should have fired all these people. But they've always got blackmail files on him. He has always been very fearful, very timid, very cautious, and so forth. But you still got to understand, he's not the biggest fascist on the block. ISIS is essentially the continuation of the Anbar awakening, or the Sunni awakening, in 2006, 2007, 2008. Remember, Petraeus saw the entirety of Iraqi society arrayed against the invasion forces, and he said, well, what I have to do here is to break that unity. I will create a counter gang. I will create, in the method of Brigadier General Frank Kitson of the British Army, I'll create a pseudo organization here, right? A pseudo tentacle, or counter gang indeed, and I'll have them attack some other part of Iraqi society. We'll get a civil war going, and that's what he did. So the Sunni awakening, or the Anbar awakening, let's say of the mid-aughties, the previous decade, is exactly what we get with ISIS. ISIS is a continuation of that. And the idea of Iran descended into Central Asia, targeting big, important countries like Kazakhstan and the other so-called stands, right, the five in Central Asia. But then think about Dagestan, think about Chechnya, think about the southern part of Russia in general, but especially the Caucasus, Transcaucasus. The idea of this Petraeus clique is that ISIS has to be tenderly preserved so